All right, you guys, we are moving on to the intolerable acts. But first, let's recap. In our last section, we talked about the Boston Tea Party, where colonists protested in different ways to boycott tea because they were angry about the tax still being put on the tea. That made the king try and force them into buying one type of tea, British tea, and some colonists rebelled that by dumping 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. This made the citizens of Great Britain and the king furious. Having a furious king is not good. That leads us to the intolerable acts. After the Boston Tea Party, Parliament and the king tried to pass several laws called the Coercive Acts. Now, the Coercive Acts, the idea behind it was they were going to force the colonists to obey Great Britain. They felt like that the colonists were misbehaving and they needed to be put back in line. Well, the colonists called all of these coercive acts the intolerable acts. Intolerable means you just can't stand them. One example of an intolerable act was the Boston Port Act. This closed the Boston port, the Boston harbor, to all ships. They couldn't come and they couldn't go until Boston had paid for the tea that they had dumped overboard. Well, if you think about that, most people in Boston worked in the harbor. They got their money from fishing, from trading, from ways that they needed to use the harbor. Well, how were they going to pay back something if the only way they made their money was by using the Boston Harbor, and now they're not allowed to use it? So that's why they felt like it was intolerable. They lost their jobs, and some feared that they would starve because now they couldn't use the Boston Harbor. But other colonists did step in other colonies, by sending food, by sending money and supplies to Boston. And this was also the start of the First Continental Congress, which was held in 1774, where leaders from every colony except Georgia came and met in Philadelphia. This is where they really expressed their complaints. They started to meet about what they could do, and the angry delegates, the representatives, agreed that they would fight against these acts and the other intolerable acts, that they were not going to put up with it. So this meeting of the First Continental Congress was the first time that representatives from each colony came and held and presented complaints against the king and decided to set up boycotts of other British goods. And they arranged to have a second meeting. So they were starting to get things in place for rebelling against Great Britain.